What's happening, Mississippi? You found the Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on NPB Think Radio, where we explore the ideas and people that are shaping Mississippi's future. Today, we've got a lively program ahead for you. We're discussing some controversies at the Capitol. We're going to talk about National School Choice Week with AFP Mississippi State Director Starla Brown. We're talking a little bit about wine, whether or not it's shipped to your door. Some people think that it should. We'll talk to State Representative Brent Powell, who's filed a bill to allow that to happen. So a lively bunch of topics to cover. First, we're going to go around the horn a little bit on some important news breaking around the state and really around the country that's going to impact Mississippians. We're coming at you live right here from the MPB Think Radio studio, where it is a sauna once again. This place is made for sweating. It is just made for sweating.
I come in knowing I'm going to lose at least 2 to 3 pounds of water weight.
Well, clearly I should just stay in here all day.
No,
and then we might be on for something. No, so let's talk about two things. And Germaine, you and I were talking about this a little bit off air, that have made national news out of Mississippi. From this commentator's point of view, neither one positive. A lot of sort of furrowed brows, but two very distinct bills. The first one that made some national news late last week, State Senator Bradford Blackman filed a bill that I believe was something like contraception begins at erection.
Yes.
Is that right? Was the title?
Yes, I will agree with what it is you just said.
Right. And so if you have children listening, it's not my fault. I'm just going to report on what is in the bill.
And that's the title of it, right?
That is the title of the bill. You might want to avert your ears for a couple minutes if you have children listening. Look, the bill was quite clearly designed as a statement bill around the topic of abortion, which is a hot button topic.
Correct.
It's one that people have very passionate disagreements on. But it seems like what he was trying to suggest was that there was a bodily autonomy issue at play.
Yes.
But the way the bill was written was to essentially say that if a male, I'm going to try and be very scientific.
I mean, you could say it would be a self-pleasure.
Yeah, if a male ejaculates and the goal is not conception, it would make it a crime. And so a lot of people saw that bill and said, okay, well, this potentially implicates self-pleasure, as you would put it. It also implicates other sexual acts that aren't designed for conception.
Right.
It could also implicate the use of prophylactics, like condoms, as an example. And so I think a lot of people saw this bill and said, hey, this is an attempt at gotcha, but it's a ham-fisted attempt at gotcha. And the end results of it would be very, very weird and very bad.
And that's what's happening now, because now he has come out and said that he has received death threats behind this going viral, basically.
Yeah, and look, you and I were talking about this on air. I think the idea or the concept or the point that he was trying to prove didn't resonate. It didn't really connect.
Yeah.
But nobody should receive death threats.
Yeah.
I mean, I really wish.
I understand that. That's for sure.
I really wish, though, that legislators thought in terms of what is going to be the national implication of me filing something. The vast majority of people are either not going to understand what I'm trying to do, or they're going to think, hey, this is really, really silly.
Right.
Because it gives the state a black eye. And so, it's horrible that the guy is receiving death threats.
Yeah.
If there is a silver lining in the situation, is like maybe legislators will think twice before filing stuff that is clearly just intended to draw.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta weigh in public perception.
Sure.
You know, you've got to figure out how will this be perceived in the public, no matter what it is I intend to do with it.
And look, my personal commentary on the point that he's trying to make is that there is, in fact, a difference between ejaculation and conception, right? That ejaculate by itself never is enough to form a human being.
Correct.
Conception actually is the beginning of that process. But I think the bill itself left a lot to be desired and obviously has invited ridicule that I wish wasn't on the state. So the second one that is, in my view, actually a scarier proposition And this will draw ire from people on both sides of the aisle. So I will be a lightning rod for people on both sides of the aisle in what I'm about to say. There was a bill filed by a state representative, brand new state representative from DeSoto County, that would create a system where citizens could report to a government agency, basically a new government function, that they believe that someone in their community is here illegally, that they're an illegal immigrant. And if that person ends up being correct, that person would receive a $1,000 bounty, a reward for having identified someone who's an illegal immigrant. There are a lot of opinions on this subject. Americans have very strong views on this subject the same way they do on lots of other subjects. There is consensus right now in America, though, that there's a problem at the border. There's consensus around, like, hey, how do we make sure that we're actually protecting our laws? I mean, you see majorities on polls pretty strongly on these issues where people are concerned about the idea of illegal immigration. Here's what I would say, though, is creating a scenario where any person can identify someone and put them...
Any is the key word here.
And put them under the microscope of the government is scary to me, because you can easily envision a situation in which people who happen to look Hispanic, because I think a lot of people assume that people who are here illegally came from our southern border, would become the subject of investigations, even if they are here completely legally, living normal lives.
Right.
And I watched during COVID the reaction to some states that created hotlines where you could call and tell on your neighbor for having a party or for not socially distancing. And that was repugnant to me, too, because I really don't like the idea of turning neighbors
into
the police.
Correct.
And so I think the bill, for whatever the intent was, we're going to help the Trump administration identify illegal aliens, whatever it might be, the design of the bill creates a financial incentive, for lack of a better way to put it, to racially profile. And to turn citizens into the police. It has drawn national attention because of its boldness. I would just say, as someone who adopts the conservative mantle, that it's not designed well. And at some level, we really should be thinking about the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, as the primary mover in determining how to dictate, how we're going to identify illegal immigrants, what we're going to do with them, what is the process. One of the other crazy things in the bill, Germaine, is that it was written in a way that said unless the feds come in and take possession of that person and deport them within 24 hours, the crime for being in a state crime in Mississippi would be a trespass crime that would draw a life in prison sentence.
Wow.
So we all know the federal government doesn't move fast.
Right.
So even if somehow this system was going to work, that component is really scary, because you're literally talking about paying for someone to be in prison for the rest of their life, where the crime is that they are somewhere they shouldn't be.
Right.
Seems disproportionate.
Yeah. Here's the thing, too. Maybe I'm Hollywoodizing this bounty hunter situation, but I thought there were people who were designated to be bounty hunters. No?
So there are two components in the bill. There's the reporting function, which is anybody can call and report. And then there's a function of people who are designated as bounty hunters to then go and take those people into custody.
Okay. So
you're
I see
right.
what you're saying.
There is a certified bounty hunter component in the bill.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that's the name of the bill, is to create a certified bounty hunter.
Well, this needs to be the only person, in my opinion, if that was to happen, to go and do that thing.
I just think right now there are people who are thinking in terms of, hey, there's been this huge problem and they feel like it's never been addressed. And so now they are trying to figure out what are the ways that we can complement or be involved in the solution. Their real risk is if the end result is that we turn citizens into the police against their neighbors.
Do not do regular civilians. Do not.
Sure. And especially if you give an economic incentive, right? You can imagine a scenario in which someone just starts calling on everybody. Because it's kind of like, well, if I turn in 500 people.
I don't like them at all. It just doesn't matter.
Or I turn in 500 people and I'm right about 5 of them, I get $5,000. So there's an incentive.
You're right.
To turn in as many as possible on the off chance that you'd be right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't think that bill's going anywhere, so I really shouldn't give it this much time. I think leadership understands the warts that are involved with that bill. But I hate that kind of stuff percolates up from Mississippi, because it plays into what I think are false stereotypes about our state.
Right.
And so that's certainly crazy.
Here's the thing. Quick question. I just want to know, are they working overtime in D.C. right now? They've got to be, with all of the bills and everything that's coming out.
Well, look, and if you think about what's going on in D.C., it's also crazy. The speed at which things are moving is incredible. And I said this morning. It's like you can disagree or agree with what he's doing. There are going to be some things that courts probably disagree with what he's doing in President Trump. But he has a strategy. And that strategy is we're going to go as fast as anybody in this town has ever seen.
I see that is the strategy.
And for a town that moves incredibly slowly, I think there are a lot of people who are on their heels right now going, holy cow, this man intends to do things we've not seen before. I mean, look, D.C. is largely run by 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
And everything is a slow, sort of grinding, consensus-building process. And you get any kind of executive in a role like that, like somebody that came from the business world and is used to saying jump and somebody says how high. I think that attitude is present more than what it was in President Trump's first term. That he's decided, I think, we didn't get nearly as much done as I wanted to get in my first term. So in my second term, we're going full bore, right?
Hammer.
We're gonna hit them with everything we've got. We're gonna hit it fast. We had this conversation yesterday unfolding around: are they going to pause federal spending on some federal programs, federal assistance programs? We had a judge yesterday at least pause the pause. I would actually say that he probably has constitutional authority to do that. Because really what you're talking about is not clawing back federal money. Really what you're talking about is from an administrative standpoint saying, we're going to look at and see whether or not it's being spent the way it was appropriated. And that is an executive function. So it'll be interesting to see how all this stuff pans out.
Yeah.
But certainly a lot of moving pieces. And look, I'd say this, a little closer to home. We've got some interesting things going on right now with what will happen in our capital city with the mayoral race. Obviously, our current mayor, Chokwe Antar Lumumba, is under federal indictment for an alleged bribery scheme. Was alleged to have taken $50,000 in checks in exchange for moving what's called an RFQ deadline for a proposal to build a hotel. That trial has not occurred yet, probably won't occur until late next year, if not the year after, or late this year, if not 2026. In the meantime, he's saying he's running for mayor again. He has until Friday to say yes for sure and sign on the dotted line. The issue for the mayor is that he has admitted that he hasn't filed campaign finance reports since 2021. He is supposed to, under Mississippi law, have filed them every year since then, and has not. And there is a provision in Mississippi law that was created in 2023 that says if you're not up to date on the last 5 years of campaign finance reports,
you can't run.
You're not qualified to be on the ballot. So he's got to catch up all of those reports. And the risk to him is that, does he write on one of those reports? Because remember, the checks were deposited into a campaign account according to the FBI. Does he have to write on the report, I received on this date in Miami on a yacht $50,000 in checks, and I dispersed them to myself out of my account, which is another allegation that prosecutors have made. That becomes an admission in court. And so he's in this interesting circumstance where if he writes it down, it becomes an admission in court. If he doesn't write it down, the lawyers that listening will know this, is that it becomes a character evidence issue about dishonesty.
Yeah.
It could also open him up to other conspiracy charges. So he's in this weird dilemma right now on what to do and how to move forward. I'm sure his lawyers are trying to figure out how to navigate what is a narrow path that has some risk of peril in it.
Everybody's working overtime in politics this year, Russ.
Everybody. From Jackson City Hall to the halls of the legislature, all the way up to the vaunted halls of Washington, D.C. You're listening to Sit Down with Russ Latino. We're going to be right back in just a few moments to talk to Starla Brown, AFP State Director, about National School Choice Week. You're listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio. We were just discussing a litany of topics from bills that missed the mark on contraception to illegal immigration to what's going on in Washington, D.C. and what's going on in the state capitol with the mayoral race. All of that is important, but equally important, or maybe more important, and I would say more important, is how we invest in the future for our children. And a big component of that is thinking about making sure that our education system works for all kids in Mississippi. We're joined by AFP State Director Starla Brown. Starla, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for being on. How are you? You getting used to the session being back in full force?
I am. It's a busy time, obviously. We're coming up on an important deadline on February 4th for bills to be heard that have originated out of their own part of the House and Senate. So but this week is National School Choice Week. So we have something called the 601 Blueprint. We've shared on our social media with legislators and our activists. And in that blueprint, we have two things under the sort of the policy bucket of education, and one is education savings accounts, where the state dollars would follow the student to a choice, and that can be several types of choices. The other is something commonly called around policy walks as open enrollment, but not to confuse that with insurance. It's a public to public school transfer, and so one of the issues that we have in the state of Mississippi is that let's just say there's a school, and for whatever reason. I could share lots of stories for students who go for just because of a particular curriculum or whatever that might be, or they're in a failing school as we often refer to it. But there are many, many reasons why a child would want to transfer from one public school to another. And so in Mississippi right now, that school that you want to go to may say, hey, come on over. We've got room for you. There's capacity. That's a piece of it. But the school where you're attending could veto that down. And so this is something we think we need to remove. It's also something we don't really track with data. So we don't know how often it happens or doesn't happen.
So I want to back up a little bit. I think
Okay.
you probably have explained it in your answer, but maybe just to crystallize this in people's mind, because people hear phrases like school choice and they really don't know what that means. Talk about what is school choice as a concept?
Well, I could share my own personal story a little bit. So I had a younger brother who had some different issues. They ranged from learning disabilities to mental health issues later in life. And so for us, I started in a public school, perfectly fine with grew up in Meridian, Mississippi, loved my first 2 years in public school, probably got in trouble a few times having to stay after and write on the chalkboard, but that was just...
I don't think they do that anymore.
Yeah, I know. But you know what? It wasn't so bad.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's okay. But my younger brother had these issues. So he started in a private school in kindergarten when we were growing up, and then we went to a Baptist faith-based private school, and it only went through sixth grade, and then we graduated and went on to an academy. I actually did some dual enrollment kind of classes, but my brother had to be there. There were reasons that he needed that environment, and the reason that I was there is because I was the one family member that he responded to the most. But around age of 13, when we left the other schools, and some of my friends went to public schools, they started telling me, like, we don't pay for our books and we don't pay tuition now and all of these things. And so I had this conversation with my father about, you're paying, which he explains, I do pay taxes to fund those schools, but yet we had a need and had to go to that private school. And I think for a lot of families, there's just a unique need out there that people have. And I think the best way to understand that is we need to be talking about individuals and not about a system.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of people, because the system has been a certain way for a long time, they think of their school option as being the public school where they live. And for a lot of people, that's a great option. I mean, both of my kids are in public school where we live. It's a blue ribbon winning school, excellent school. But there are probably kids, even in that excellent school, who, for whatever reason, it's not the right setting for them.
Right.
And so I think part of the school choice conversation from my vantage point, and I have an opinion and a perspective, but from my vantage point is recognizing that it's not pitting one type of school against another type of school. Kind of to your point,
Right.
it really is what is in the best interest of the individual student. And if we're going to make a public investment in that student, doesn't it make sense to make the investment where that kid has the best chance?
Sure, absolutely. I could share with you, as you know, I took a stint away from Mississippi and spent a good portion of my life in Florida, where I worked on universal school choice options there for about 8 years, and back home, and glad to be here and enjoying it and plan on staying. So, but I would say this. There were even kids in Boca Raton, Florida, who had two very perfectly wonderful high schools. But I remember a friend of mine, her daughter wanted to participate in ROTC programs, and there was only one at one high school. She didn't live in that. There was an arbitrary line that says you have to go to school here. And so, they finagled some ways to finally get her over there, but it was an uphill battle. And she literally, this is what she wanted to do, invest in her military, career that she planned to do even post high school. So kids are not always just leaving because like their school is failing. They're leaving for needs that they have or things they want to do for the future.
So you mentioned two different types of what I guess I'll call a choice program. One of those types was that you would look at taking a kid and giving them access to a scholarship account that allows them to go to a private school that allows them to get tutoring, all sorts of things. That's what you call the education savings account or scholarship account?
Correct.
And then the second part you called open enrollment, although I think you said that confuses people around healthcare. That really is saying that a kid can attend another public school other than the one where they live.
Correct. There are kids in failing schools, and it's not just about like a failing district. Even a C school might not fit your needs, but you could be being bullied. You could be looking for a different curriculum. There could be a school that's closer that makes sense for you if it, you just think your parents think it's a better school. If that school has capacity.
So tell me, beyond the sort of the theory, right? Are there bills that are being considered by the legislature that would do either of these two things right now?
So there are some limited ESA bills around special needs, some things like that. We certainly would love to see. I don't think we'll see this session like a full universal. What I will say is Alabama has passed an ESA, Louisiana has passed an ESA. Arkansas, a great model and one that Mississippi could follow, has passed an ESA, and we're about to see that in Tennessee, maybe even in the next week or two. So we're just going to be surrounded by schools with that opportunity. And I don't know, if I'm a parent, even if you work just around that line, what do you think about doing? That could cause people to migrate out. I don't think we'll see like a huge ESA bill this session, but there is a great bill, House Bill 1435. Representative Jansen Owen is the sponsor, and we've indicated to the legislature that we'd like to see that pass. And it is more about that public to public transfer. So there's a lot of good pieces for that. There's some things we can improve on as it goes through the process, but we'd sure like to see it pass this session.
So I think let me play devil's advocate with you, because I think there are a lot of arguments that get used against this concept.
Sure.
Both for public to public and for the ESA concept that you've mentioned. So one of those arguments really is, we understand what you're saying about creating choice for kids, but by removing kids from their existing public school, you're undermining the funding for that public school, and you're making it such that those public schools ultimately have less resources to be able to do their jobs.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, if you look at how we changed the funding formula this past session, there's a lot of ways, and there's ways that we can do this in this bill to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, I want to say this. There's a lot of public funded entities out there besides schools. There's parks, there's recreational buildings. There's all kinds of things that are, and no one says you can't go to this park or you can't go here with those those funded tax dollars. But I think the premise here is we've got to stop prioritizing this system and prioritize the individual student. There will be plenty of students who will not transfer to another public school. Like you said, your kids are happy with the school they're in. We've got to think though about the kids who really have a need, and you see sometimes bills that carve out for a certain group of students or this part of a district or whatever. Those are weak bills. We need to have this available to everybody. Picking winners and losers in our schools is not something we should be doing.
So, I think there's the argument about is the end result of this underfunding schools, which you've addressed.
Okay.
I think there's another argument that says, look, if we were to do the programs that you want to do, it either ends up benefiting kids who are already wealthy enough to go wherever they want to go, or it ends up busting our budget as a state. What's the response to that criticism?
I would say that in states, and just this past week we had some studies come out. I've been to the organizations who are opposing this to their meetings. I recently attended one in Oxford, and a lot of what they're saying just isn't simply true. And Arizona is a great example. They now have a surplus in their education budget, and it hasn't broken the bank. And so they've had...
And Arizona's done something like what we're talking about?
Yes, exactly. So this is not a scenario where, we're not seeing this in other states at this point. And so some of them have had it for longer than, just the last year. You're going to see states like Wyoming starting to pass ESAs even this year. They're moving through the legislature pretty quickly. I just think the idea of the tax dollars, and I go back to my personal story, those tax dollars are paid by the parents. It's really your money. And so I think having some say-so in how that money is utilized for the education of your child, putting parents and families first, is so important.
So not to beat the proverbial dead horse, but for whatever reason, there are a lot of people who are concerned about the impact on existing public schools when you have the introduction of choice. Assume that those people are operating in good faith, that they're legitimately concerned about the impact. What do you say to them to allay those concerns? You mentioned having come up in Florida. What's the experience like in Florida?
Well, Florida used to be pretty last in education, but over the years of incremental changes in the area of choice, they're not last anymore, right? They're leading the nation in many areas. I would say this, there's an entrepreneurial side to this that impacts teachers. The options are not just private school, public school. There are things like micro schools, right? There are things like textbooks, tutoring. All of these things can be part of this piece. And so I guess what I would say to you is if a school is failing year after year after year, and I know this is uncomfortable to say, but we spend a lot of money sometimes trying to get that school to turn around. Maybe that school should close. Maybe there should be some other option for those families, even if it's another public school, right, or another opportunity. So I think we have to look at everything, lay everything on the table, and come back with something that puts families first.
So I know this from having done a little research on this, is like 48% of Florida kids attend a school other than the public school where they live.
Sure.
Right? So that could be another public school, that could be a private school. And that's a byproduct of the fact that Florida's got this vast array of programs, from tax credit scholarships to ESAs,
right,
you name it, open enrollment programs. All that stuff's on the table. What has been the impact on Florida public schools, the schools where people do live?
Right. Well, I guess what I would say, look, there have been some scenarios where schools have really but those schools were failing the students. In fact, we refer to them in Florida as failure factories, because students were coming out and not with the education that they deserved, but they were bound by those arbitrary lines to attend that school. I just don't think that's the right thing to do by our kids. If you can look at it from the economic standpoint, but at the same time, if there are better opportunities out there for parents to spend those tax dollars, they should have the opportunity to spend them there.
But there are still public schools in Florida.
Absolutely.
There are still teachers in Florida.
Oh, my goodness, yes. There are turnaround schools in Florida. There was one in Tampa a few years ago that was just a terrible school, and a gross principal who came in did a turnaround program there with the school, and those kids went from just being a terrible thing to being, I think, like number 3 in the nation in robotics in about a 3-year period because they change what they're doing. So there's not a lack of public schools by any means in Florida.
So I've just got a couple minutes left here. What's the prognosis for one or both of these ideas moving? It sounds like you're saying the open enrollment has a better chance of moving. What's the likelihood of it in the Senate? Do you have a sense of that?
Well, I hope that the Senate will take the bill up. We can get it passed in the House if that happens, and we are working hard this week. Families, if you care, and we have people out there who do, and other individuals who and other organizations that are working on this all across the country. And what I would say to people is, if you have a relationship with your legislator, give them a call. Tell them you want this public-to-public transfer and that you support it, and now's the time.
We've been talking with State Director of AFP Mississippi, Starla Brown. Starla, thanks for coming in as part of National School Choice Week. We'll be back in just a moment to talk about wine shipment. That's a hot button issue for the last several years. Maybe you'll be able to order some wine to your door. What do you think?
I hope so, Russ.
Back in just a second. You're listening to The Sit Down right here on NPB Think Radio. I'm your host, Russ Latino. We've had a lively show today, talking about the state capitol, some controversial bills that have percolated up into national news. This one probably won't make national news, but it's one that Mississippians should care about. We're talking with State Representative Brent Powell. Brent, good to see you.
Good to see you, Russ. Thanks for having me.
So you have a bill that would allow me, if I so choose, as I understand it, to place an order and have some wine shipped to my door. Is that right?
Correct. Actually, we got 3 similar bills. We got to keep something alive in some way, somehow. So yes.
Tell me about the impetus behind the bill and kind of why you think it's an important issue.
Well, I think we're only one of 3 states that don't allow direct ship, and one of the big issues is just consumer what they want. ABC Warehouse is tight on space, so they're not going to hold the premium kind of wines that you can get from your direct ship or your smaller boutique wines from, like if you go out to Napa and there's a small winery there that you want to ship something that ABC doesn't carry, we ought to be able to get it. Another example is my wife went to Barcelona on a girls' trip, and they went and visited a few wineries out there, and she went and tried to get it shipped back. Of course, you can't do that either. So it's just modernizing our antiquated liquor laws.
Yeah, no, it's crazy to me. We've got, in a lot of ways, and this goes beyond wine, this is Russ's personal view, we are dealing with the vestiges of prohibition even today.
We're still prohibition state. I can't even get that passed.
Yeah, in the state of Mississippi, where for, now close to 100 years ago, we made a decision to the country made a decision to do away with prohibition, but you still see the elements of that in Mississippi law, certainly. And there's a reticence, I think, to think big about what would this do for an industry, how would this help consumers. Give me a sense of, you said you got 3 bills alive. This is something y'all have worked on for multiple years, right?
Right. We got real close last year, and it got shut down on a point of order on the Senate side. The House side, we passed just about anything we want as far as modernizing it, but we got real close last year, and I'm hoping we can get this over the finish line this year.
What is the argument, and I hate to ask you to argue against your own bill, but what is the argument that you hear against the idea of allowing an adult to make a decision to purchase and have wine shipped to their door?
I really don't hear that much of an argument. I get more of an argument from the package store and the retailers, and they're just scared we're going to put them out of business by doing this. And what the way we've crafted, my original bill's wide open, but nobody's going to order a case of Freak Show and pay for the shipping cost to come when you just go down the road. So, but the way we have it crafted now is if ABC does not carry it, or their allocation of something runs out for the year, then you can order it. So in no way will this hurt your local package store at all.
Yeah, and I think that point's an interesting point, because when I think about this is if I'm out and I'm grocery shopping, as an example, and that's maybe a different topic for a different day.
That's a heavier lift.
That's a heavier lift. But let's say I'm out grocery shopping and I buy stuff to make a meal, and there's a package store next door, and I go over there and I buy a bottle of wine. It's sort of instantaneous, right? I know that I'm making this meal. I need to go pick up a bottle of red wine because it goes well with a steak, whatever it is. That's different than somebody saying, you know what, I'd like a case of Dariouche, right? Or I'd like a case of Beckstoffer Tocalone, the good stuff, right? Or whatever it is. I'm looking over here. We've got Arnie Hederman sitting over here monitoring things. Arnie's a good guy. And he's not on microphone, but I'll talk for him. He's been involved in this Uncork the Sip movement for a while. That's a very different type of order than me just going to pick up a bottle of red wine to make a steak.
100%. And most of the people that are going to be using this particular law are not, they're going to be buying that high-end stuff. And don't think they're not doing it now. They're just shipping it to Tennessee or Louisiana, which means we're just losing that tax revenue as well. So.
Yeah, no, that's also a very good point, because at the end of the day, if somebody can't get it in Mississippi, they're probably going to find another way to get it. It always strikes me as weird that, and I get the scare or the fear of change, but it always strikes me as strange, Brent, and I'm curious what you think about this, that we have, as an example, I can order anything I want from Amazon.
Right.
But I still have stores up and down the row of every strip mall in Mississippi that haven't been put out of business by virtue of the fact that I can order anything I want from Amazon.
Correct.
It just creates another way to access something. I think you mentioned we're one of 3 states that don't allow for this. All those other states also have advanced package and wine stores where you can pick up nice stuff, right?
They have much. For instance, Texas has huge liquor stores. They're not hurting at all. I mean, it's the same situation. You're just ordering what you want from whatever winery you want.
Yeah, it strikes me that part of that too is that you're actually expanding the market.
Yes.
Right. So let's say, as an example, you decide to order a type of wine and you get into that type of wine, and then you might then start going to the liquor store or the package store to see, do they have something similar to what I've gotten into, right? So you've actually created new potential customers by opening up that door, so to speak.
That's correct. Yep.
It's crazy. So, I mean, I know you said there doesn't really seem to be much actual opposition. Why is it taking so long?
I don't know. They have a great presence at the Capitol is the only thing I can come up with. And people, when you start messing with your local business people, in this case package stores, they don't want the change, so they're gonna reach out and be kind of vocal about it. And so I guess it's just a kind of a fear of some of the legislators that they don't want to make their local people mad, especially the business people.
So how would it work? Let's take your bill that's wide open. What would that look like logistically for the state of Mississippi? Does the state still collect the tax on?
Yes. What we're doing is we're putting it, and I talked to DOR about it. They gave me a number to kind of be in line with your liquor stores. They would need 16 to 18% on the shipper's end of it. So that would be kind of your sin tax, because I think it's 20-something% here. So everything would line up with that. So you're not losing any tax revenue. You're actually going to gain tax revenue because you've got a new products coming in.
And gain it because, like you said, there are people who are already taking advantage of shipping. They're just shipping to other states.
That's correct.
You know, you go across the border where we live in Mississippi, it's a 45-minute ride to Louisiana. You go to Tallulah, you pick up a case of wine, you're paying taxes in Louisiana instead of paying taxes in Mississippi.
That's correct. Absolutely. And I mean, I wouldn't say it's a huge revenue source, but it's still there. Why not collect it? Why are we denying the citizens in Mississippi this opportunity when the other states can?
How are there other states that have recently done this, or are we just so far behind everybody?
I can't really speak to recently, but we're pretty far behind on most of these states. This is not something new that's just all of a sudden come up recently.
And tell me how that works with ABC right now. Let's say I want something that's really rare. Can I write them and say, hey, can you source this really rare wine, or how does that work?
I don't believe you can go through them. You could request it, but they're so tight on space. You can ship to your local package store as it is now, and they're going to do some sort of fee. I don't know what they charge you if you shipped it to them. But then you got the problem is, all right, what happens if there's breakage in the shipping? Is it the shipper, or is it the package store, or are you going to have to eat it? So you can do that now. As far as ABC goes, you probably could request it, but you're going to have a lot of it. They're not just going to, do 2 or 3 cases of this stuff. They're going to want to make sure if they're going to eat up their spot on the warehouse, they're going to want to make sure they're selling it a lot.
And not to sound too snobby, but some of these wines you can't buy multiple cases of, right? Some of these wines, they have an allotment where you can buy a certain number of bottles. If you're lucky in a lottery, so that if ABC is saying, hey, we want you to buy 6 cases to make this worth our while, that order's never going to be filled.
No, and I mean, your package stores aren't going to want to put a $200 or $300 bottle of wine on the shelf and let it sit there and collect dust for months until somebody decides they want to buy it as well.
This is the kind of stuff that bothers me in Mississippi, to be honest with you. We have this sort of protectionist tendency where we think that everything should always stay the way it has been, right? And I'm sympathetic to mom and pops who have invested in their businesses. I want those businesses to thrive. I know that they thrive in other states, even with competition, right?
Right.
And so I look at it and I say, at the end of the day, why don't we as a state treat adults like adults?
I wholeheartedly agree. And I mean, they don't like change, and they've been playing by the rules, and nobody wants to break them of that. So, but let's modernize. And I've got 5 different kinds of alcohol bills, but one of them we're trying to push this year also is Sunday sales. Now, we're just wanting to be able to open the package store on a Sunday from 1 to 5 or 1 to 6. We're not telling them they have to. Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A aren't open on Sunday, but I'm even getting pushed back on that because they don't. The package stores just don't want any kind of change.
Yeah, and look, I mean, there's an odd coalition that's always been in place. I've referred on the show to Soggy Sweat a few times, right? The old "If by Whiskey" speech.
I've got the speech in my office
and
at the Capitol.
And it's a great speech. It's a great speech. I grew up Baptist. I grew up working in Baptist churches. I recognize that there is a faith-based argument against the use of alcohol, right? But you've always had this odd coalition of people, the bootleggers and the Baptist, right? The people who are in the industry and don't want any competition at all, and the people who, for moral reasons, have questions about whether or not we should open it up. I happen to be a believer, though, that limited government works and that individuals should have freedom and the ability to make decisions for themselves. And at some level, it just strikes me as crazy that we trust people to make all sorts of decisions that have far bigger implications. And we look at something like this and say, well, heck, Joe Bob, you can't order a bottle of nice wine and have it shipped to your door. Right. That seems backwards to me.
It's 100% backwards. And a few years ago, we passed medical cannabis. All right, so now my constituents can get stoned, but they can't order a bottle of wine? Come on.
So what's the prognosis? You feeling good about this getting passed this year?
I feel good. I don't think we're going to get everything we want, but we've sat down with the representatives from the package stores, and we've crafted something. I won't say they're helping us pass it, but they can live with what we've done, and that's what I was explaining a minute ago. That if ABC doesn't carry it, you should be able to order it.
Yeah. So and that's an important point. Although I personally would prefer a bill that says that as an adult I can order whatever I want to my door.
Got it. Yes.
And think it's kind of silly, but you are constraining it in a way that says we're actually only allowing people to ship things to their door that presently ABC can't get them.
Correct. And we're trying to work with the package store retailers and trying just to get them to the table. Anything we do, we want to make sure they're on board with. The last thing we want to do is put anybody out of business. It doesn't matter whether it's this, it doesn't matter whether it's wine and grocery stores. There are solutions for everything. We just need them to come to the table with us, and let's start getting some of this stuff done.
So let me ask you this. Obviously, that's important to you. I think you've told me that you've filed 5 different alcohol-related bills.
Right.
Not all of them relate to wine, though, right?
No. One of them is, right now in the state of Mississippi, you can only have 1 permit, which means we can only have 1 Costco. So I've got a bill that you can have up to 3 permits. Try to get a Costco in North Mississippi, South Mississippi. Again, just an antiquated law. Now, that one kind of ties in with your grocery store because the package stores are worried that this is kind of the start of that. But they're two totally different things. I think we've got a lot of work to do on the grocery store aspect of it, but 3 permits, let DeSoto County and the coast have a Costco, or if Trader Joe comes in, the same situation.
Yeah, and I don't want to confuse the issue because one of those bills quite clearly is pretty limited, but I do think at some point the state of Mississippi is going to have to address whether or not grocery stores get to sell
I do too.
wine. I have lived in states where grocery stores sell wine, and what I will tell you is that, 1, it is a tremendous convenience to the consumer. 2, the types of wine that they are selling, it's a little bit like the conversation about shipping. They are not supplying an inventory that speaks to a wine snob in a grocery store.
Correct.
They're supplying an inventory that speaks to Russ is making spaghetti tonight and let's pick up a bottle, right?
That's correct. And you can go to Florida and the grocery store and the liquor store right next to each other.
Yes. Because it's this silly fiction because you put a little wall between the two,
correct.
Right? So you look at that and you go, that also just creates new consumers. That's what happened in Alabama. Right? They opened it up, as I understand it, and it actually helped wine and package stores because the end result was that you created new consumers
correct.
Buying into that product. People are going to think that I'm like a wine snob after this conversation. They're going to think I'm a boozer. Neither one of those things are true.
Well, I'm no wine. My wife likes wine. I'll drink a glass, but I'm not drinking what Arnie drinks. I can promise you that.
Yeah, well, nobody drinks what Arnie drinks. It's that Italian swill that he drinks. It's not worth a darn. I'm really, it's unfair because I'm making fun of the guy and he doesn't have a microphone. Let me say this. At the end of the day, for me, this is an individual freedom thing.
I think so, too.
I think that human beings should be treated with the dignity of making adult decisions.
I do, too.
And so, to me, that's a no-brainer. And candidly, I scratch my head looking at all of the alcohol laws in Mississippi. And, the crazy part about that is, and there's a lot of studies on this, for people who are concerned with alcoholism, the stricter the laws, the states with the strictest laws often have the worst alcohol problems because they've made something that shouldn't be taboo into something that is taboo. And by doing that, have created all sorts of problems. Mississippi is one of those states that does have problems because people have never been taught to think about it in a responsible way. Let me ask you this. I won't get you to agree with me or disagree with me on that last point. What else you got going that Mississippi should know about outside of alcohol, maybe?
Outside of alcohol. I don't have a lot this year that I'm pushing that would be groundbreaking, I guess, to say. We've got some other bills.
Or what are you excited about in the House?
I like the tax cut, the income tax cut. We voted on that already. I think that's a great proposal. I'm eager to see what the Senate does with it, if they tweak it or they just don't take it up. Hopefully they'll just tweak it a little bit and we can get something done. So I really like that. I'm trying to think what else we got. School choice, I've got to see about that because Rankin County is not real happy with that one. But I've got to read about it and see. We kind of got some studies or some stuff going, but I hadn't sat down with the chairman of education yet, and we hadn't even just really discussed it in caucus yet. So,
gotcha. So those are 2 big things, though.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, really big issues. Well, look, we do a thing at the end of every show, and since you're the last guy on here, I'm going to do it with you. 5 questions.
Okay.
They're the hardest questions you'll ever be asked.
Okay.
Just getting you ready for it. Sweet tea or unsweet tea?
Unsweet with sweetener.
All right, I'm trying to wrap my brain around that. So you're talking about no-calorie sweetener?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Don't pour a cup of sugar in it while you're making it.
No, that's too sweet for me. Yeah, like my wife's grandmother does it, and it's like drinking syrup, and I just can't do that. So.
Gotcha. All right, you're in your car, and you look down at the speedometer, and you happen to be going 95 miles an hour. What are you jamming out to?
Probably AC/DC at that point.
Okay. Any particular song that really kind of gets you fired up? Or
No,
all
anything
of it?
Yeah, I'm pretty.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. All right, cornbread or biscuits?
Biscuits.
I go back and forth on this one.
Yeah, it depends what the meal is, but yeah, I like cornbread.
Yeah.
But biscuits, I don't know.
I think if you have the right ratio of jalapenos in a piece of cornbread,
There you go.
it can kick it up a notch. But I think I'm with you. Biscuits are good. All right. What are you reading right now? Anything interesting?
Nothing yet. My wife just got me Steve Robertson's books on Mississippi State, so I'm going to get started on those. So,
Okay, very good. And one hidden gem in Mississippi that people should know about.
hidden gem in Mississippi. Hidden gem. If you haven't been to Pickwick, you need to go. That's where my wife's from Corinth, so she talks about it. Now we're on the reservoir, and she's like, "This is not pretty water compared to Pickwick." So, if you haven't been to Pickwick, I would definitely recommend that.
There you go. It's a good one. For my guests, Starla Brown and State Representative Brent Powell, I'm Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio with the sit down. Stay tuned for Southern Remedy at 11 and join us back here next week for a new episode of the sit down right here on MPB Think Radio with Germaine in the booth signing out.